Alright, let's talk about the stuff that nobody else wants to talk about. While everybody else is busy hyping up new champs and flexing damage number, I've been taking notes, and you know what I found? Honestly, it's kind of broke. In today's video, we're going to be diving into several mechanics that, in my opinion, just don't add up. These aren't hot takes for drama. These are real issues flying under the radar that might be holding your account back without even realizing it. Let's break it down. Before I get into the list, what I would like you all to do is comment down below what you think are some toxic game mechanics before you see what my insight are, because I'm really interested to seeing or hearing from you all about what you guys think is unhealthy for the game. First mechanic that I'm going to talk about is the ignore resistance mechanic. Now, you don't see this a whole lot. In fact, I'm pretty sure you only see them on mythicals, and it's typically within a book or two of each skill ability. Now, why do I think that this is such a bad or, in fact, terrible mechanic? I think it's such a bad mechanic because it completely invalidates a perfectly legitimate strategy that's been within the game from the beginning, and now you just never see it because of exactly what I'm talking about. And that is a resistance tank, a resistance cleanser, a resistance reviver. So here, look at my Marichka. My Marichka has a total of 670 resistance. Well, if you get to ignore 20% of 670 resistance, that means her resistance is really only 536. That's over 100 resistance that is just completely ignored. It's not even part of her kit at this point. So when you invalidate an entire strategy just by putting one book into an ability, pretty toxic. But it's not just that one champion has this ability, it's that all mythicals basically have this ability. It's been used too much, and it's in a very particular hard to get type of champion. And so then basically what has happened is that's the only strategy that is viable. Like, there is no such thing as a useful resistance tank anymore, because at the highest levels, everybody's ignoring 20% of your resistance. Do you want to follow along with your own raid journey? Well, here is the start for you. Click the link in the description to get a free Karato, as well as the epics Anax, Uugo, and Mausoleum Mage. Here's what you need to do. Log out of Plarium and Play on PC and uninstall. Click the link in the description and register with a brand new email. Launch raid and complete the tutorial, and then go into your inbox and claim your first champion. Click the link in the description now before it expires. Now, the one that I'm going to talk about next is going to be the least controversial, and that's stoneskin, but not the whole thing. I actually think stoneskin's pretty good, with the exception of this line of text right here. 50% chance of blocking removals or steal. Now, I would be okay with it being 50% chance of blocking stealing, but as far as removing, I think if a champion has an accuracy requirement, it should be able to strip it off. Due to the easy accessibility of stoneskin, there's just not enough counterplay to it unless you have like stoneskin yourself, and it invalidates some strategies such as like a speed team. And then your game just turns into this thing where it's like RNG fest, where it's just like a 50-50 shot. Like, am I going to strip the stoneskin and win, or am I not going to do that? So there's just not enough counterplay to it. I understand that there are bombs and there are burns, but those aren't necessarily always super accessible to everybody until you get to the later parts in the game. Furthermore, you don't know who has stoneskin going into a fight. The next thing on the list is pinpoint, and not that pinpoint exists, and it's not that it's a 9-piece. I think that 9-piece is good and it works. I guess Feral is kind of embedded in this as well, but I think the big problem that I really have is that pinpoint gives speed after 2 sets. So on these 9-piece sets, giving speed after 2 pieces is problematic. It's gotten to the point where your regular spider level gear is almost irrelevant because the stats it gives you aren't good enough to compensate for the 10% extra speed that you're going to get when you put on 2 pieces of pinpoint. Because then all you have to look for within the pinpoint pieces are, is it the correct main stat? And the substats don't really matter too particularly much. Here's an example of a piece of gear that's really not that great, but we throw him on the champion because who cares about the attack, because we're getting 10% extra speed. I think a lot of this could be fixed really just by making the 3-piece set be 10% extra speed and the 2-piece set being something different than another 20% accuracy, maybe 30% accuracy. I don't know. But either way, just make it so that there is at least a downfall of having that 10% extra speed in just all your accessories. Make it so you have to use all 3 of your accessory slots to get that speed. The next mechanic I want to talk about is probably the most controversial, but that is ignore defense. in particular when it's paired with other things of damage mitigation that are also ignored, like ally protection, strengthen, and shield, like we have right here, as well as an additional 30% target defense. And then you tack that onto masteries, which can be up to 25%, and then more than likely you have either 25 or 35% ignore defense from the artifact set. That adds up too much. It can be to the point where we're ignoring 75 to 100% of a champion's defense all in one attack. But what has happened is with those mechanics, we have completely invalidated an entire brand of champion, and that is like the defensive tank. Imagine if I'm losing or ignoring 75% or even 50%. I'm only left with like 3,150 roughly defense to kind of work around to mitigate the damage. Well, that's completely invalidated a ton of gear sets and a ton of champions. It's also invalidated a whole other brand of champion in terms of who are the nukers that are usable, such as Cubitus here, big hitter but doesn't ignore defense. Big hitter doesn't ignore defense. Where most champions relied on ignoring defense through a set, now champions just, if they don't ignore defense in their kit, it's not enough. So we've essentially got to the point where there's no setup necessary for a nuker to be effective. They just, as soon as they go, its fight is over, and there's no like play or counterplay with that. It's just invalidated too many strategies to be a good, useful mechanic. Now, I do think there is value in having ignored defense within the game. It's just that it's gone too far overboard. I think within the, at least, arena, I think in the arena modes, there needs to be just like a general passive or cap where it's like ignored defense can only be maxed at like a certain percentage, maybe 50% or so. The next mechanic is what I'm going to call splash damage. I don't really know what else to call it, but again, it just comes down to the same thing over and over again, is that this mechanic invalidates other strategies and just pigeonholes you into these specific skills or these specific strategies are best and nothing else will top it. The most obvious or most known is Trunda. Attacks one enemy, then attacks all other enemies with a second hit, dealing 60% of the damage inflicted from the first hit and ignoring 50% defense. We know what this does in Hydra. It is an absolute monster of a hit. It's fun to see, but again, it makes it hard to use other champions as a damage dealer when you know Trunda is just going to be the absolute best and nobody's even close. You also see this with Baron. Baron's A1 will attack all remaining enemies with any surplus damage if the target is killed. This is a great way to go through waves in the Doom Tower or different types of waves. But again, when you do this, and especially when you put it on an A1, what other better one is there going to be? So when you make mechanics like this so strong, it takes away different strategies. It makes enemy max HP, which is good and very good, but it makes it not as good as something else. Using a champion that is kind of dual mode, like a Cubitus at one point, had an AoE that would just counterattack every time, plus a burn, just makes him not quite as good. There needs to be more balance within some of these mechanics. So it's not that I think that these mechanics shouldn't or can't exist. I think they can. I think they just need to be nerfed down because the surplus damage is clearly so much extra beyond what any other champion is doing that it makes everything worse. Now, the first one is ignore resistance. I think that one is going to be pretty simple. I think what needs to happen is that one needs to be removed from the game completely. Now, if you want some sort of compensation for that on the mythicals, maybe a book within each champion just gives you a level of accuracy, maybe like 20, and I think that is fair or compensated enough that it's not completely invalidating another strategy, but it does just give them a heads up on the competition. Not that mythicals need that already, but as far as stoneskin, I think the fix is super easy. You remove the word chances of blocking removals and just make it steal, so that champions at steal buffs cannot steal your stoneskin, but there's not a 50-50 chance of removing it. And maybe just increase these resistance numbers within here, maybe make this plus 15 defense and 10 resistance, so it's harder for champions to strip the stoneskin, but it's not just so random. I think the pinpoint fix is super easy. You give them one set of intercept at 2 pieces, you give them 10 speed on 3 pieces, and then at 4 piece you can go 2 and then 3 and then 4. The splash damage issue is probably a little bit bigger of one. I'm not 100% sure how I would fix this. My inclination says completely get rid of it, but if you really are against that, I think that the splash damage needs to go through the defensive mitigation multipliers, if you will, so it has to go back back through what is the champion's defense, is there ally protection, is there strengthen, all that different stuff, or just generally lower the damage that goes through on the splash damage. The ignore defense issue is a lot bigger than I maybe can wrap my mind around to exactly fix it, but what my hunch tells me is that in the arena there needs to be a cap, and then in the PvE sections I think that could probably go uncapped, but I wouldn't mind maybe exploring like, hey, certain bosses, you know, the defense ignore can only be so much, or, you know, maybe you just let that be the wild west. But I think within the PvP section there definitely needs to be a cap, because it's just at the point where nukers require 0 setup. It's just as soon as whoever's nuker gets to go first wins. So in conclusion, those mechanics are the mechanics that I feel like not only are too powerful, but just invalidate other strategies. There needs to be more balance within the game, and I think with some of my suggestions, or just generally nerfing or maybe getting rid of some of those mechanics altogether, would create a more healthy, a more balanced game. Otherwise, tell me your thoughts. Are there ones that you agree with? Are there ones that you disagree with? Are there ones that I missed completely? All of that needs to be thrown down below in the comment section. Otherwise, folks, that's the whole video. Don't forget to like and subscribe on your way out, and I will see you on the other side.